Welcome everyone to the live version of this particular webinar. Really great that you can join me live, and thank you for the people who are listening to this afterwards as well. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm joining from today, the Mullalini people of Little Witter, Tasmania. If there's any community members joining us, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to you, your elders past, present, emerging and future. Quick introduction to myself. I'm Robin Pettard, the founder of the Sprout Labs, and also the host of the Learning While Working podcast. I quite often mention that as I'm doing my introduction because a lot of what I'm talking, a lot of the examples and ideas and practices that I'm talking about actually come about from the Learning While Working podcast. I almost think about, in some ways, the Learning While Working podcast as a sort of research of what I do, and then the webinars are the synthesizing of that. About Sprout Labs, essentially we build digital learning platforms that enable you and your team to author, deliver and measure high impact digital learning ecosystems. We work generally with two platforms. One, Glasshouse, which is a learning experience platform that's focused on content, and then Totara Experience Platform, which is what we're really looking at today and thinking about in terms of it being an enabler for learning ecosystems. Sprout Labs is totally new to you. There's other content. There's like the podcast, there's the blog, which has been a little bit slow recently. There's ebooks, there's the recording of all of our past webinars in the resource section of our website, and our past virtual conferences as well, which are quite often made up of people who I talk to on the podcast, and it's a chance to do a further level of engagement with them. What we're going to be doing is looking at learning ecosystems today, and then looking at the tools that you need to build learning ecosystems. By tools, I mean sometimes strategies, that are learning design strategies, and then the actual software that you need to do those as well. A big theme is actually performance management and development has been really key to your learning culture, and then also really supporting collaboration and learning generated content as well. If we haven't noticed, work's been changing. Where we're physically working has changed. We work in hybrid environments right across the world at the moment. But at the same time as we're actually where we've been working, work's actually changed with what we want from work as well and what's expected. Essentially, Jobs has this really nice quote that the pandemic has really shifted many different things, especially as work has now become about empowerment, safety, development, and agility. When the first batch of lockdowns happened around the world, the people that the organization turned to very quickly were two people. One, to help IT teams to help people go remote, to the L&D teams to help people develop the skills to operate in a remote format. One of the things is we now, as L&D people in workplaces, become central to change, and I think that's a really unique spot to be in. And a unique thing to keep on working with as well. For me, this mantra of learning while working is becoming the new norm. Change has become a bit more faster. The rapid upskill and the rapid move to digital ways of working has meant that we've very naturally shifted, and these shifted things that possibly would have taken 10 years has actually taken months because of that time. The learning ecosystem is a really great way of rethinking your mindset for transforming your learning. There's another bit of work that I do sometimes to sit there and go, we've had this rapid, almost emergency move to the digitalization of learning. And that's quite often hasn't always raised the standard of what we're doing in digital learning. It's sometimes dropped the standard. I will do another bit of a podcast or some other content work at some stage about the fact that the learning ecosystems are possibly one of the keys to uplifting and keeping on going forward with that. So sometimes, and a lot of my webinars are interactive, and I often use what's the learning ecosystem as an interactive activity. Sorry, I'm not doing that today. I'm just actually going to talk about what my definition of it is. If you are familiar with a lot of our webinars, this particular one isn't actually particularly interactive. I should have said that at the beginning. It's very much me talking. A learning ecosystem is a system of things that work together to build a whole. And then it's actually the relationships between those things that's a really important bit. And this is the really powerful thing, that if your learning ecosystem becomes into one particular digital space, that relationship becomes very tight and very organized and very engaging. The idea of learning ecosystems is incredibly linked to our learning cultures. In our past, the learning cultures have been so focused on what the L&D team being responsible for it. Now we're in a spot where everyone's helping each other to grow, where work's learning is becoming more agile, and we've been in a spot where we're actually starting to finally work where we're moving beyond courses. This is a diagram of Sprout Labs learning ecosystem model. This actually came about because we're working with the 70-20-10 learning model, and we found that it's a great way of explaining how learning really works in workplaces. It's not always a great way of actually designing learning. So we need a better way of being able to explain really holistic learning solutions. At the core of the model, and it's actually what I found as I was doing my prep work for this, found myself spending most of the time talking about and thinking about is pathways. This is what holds everything together. Then you have gardeners, learning from each other, the importance of being actually be able to learn from your managers and peers, and then ways of being able to learn in the flow of work. This is all underpinned by your knowledge foundations. Your knowledge foundations are the thing that sits below everything. Quite often we mix up learning and knowledge as well. For me, essentially, knowledge is just a stepping stone to being able to allow you to be able to change your behavior. And to be able to change your behavior, you need places and spaces to be able to practice things, which is where the hothouse aspect comes into play. So today, I'm particularly talking about some learning design strategies and approaches. I'm also really talking about the technologies to enable those types of learning as well. Just before I dive into technologies or anything more, I just want to actually talk about 3 shifts, because quite a few times I've organized the way of thinking about the tools through what each of these different players in our learning experiences need. The shift that happens with learning ecosystems is employers become self-directed learners. Your managers become learning leaders. That becomes their primary role, is to develop people. And then as L&D people, we become ecosystem designers. Oh, for some reason I'm going the wrong way, or had the wrong slides in the wrong place. Sorry about that. The platform I'm talking about to enable this today is the Totara Talent Experience Platform. It's 3 interlinked platforms. Totara Learn, at its core, is a traditional learning management system. Totara Engage, which is a socially focused learning experience platform. And Totara Perform, which is a modern, flexible performance management system. I will go into each quite a lot more about what this actually is as well. Each one, what it are as well. A bit on Totara. So Totara is interesting for 2 reasons. One, it's global reach. This is partly because it's a partner network. Nearly 20 million users, 300 success stories on the website. The core Totara team, which I've actually even lost track of where Totara actually has offices. Its roots are in Wellington in New Zealand, but then has offices in UK, US, and I think a couple of people in Australia as well. So part of the key to this growth has actually been the partner network. And Sprout Labs is an Australian-based partner. There's 92 partners across 47 countries, and that was the 3 offices business. Sorry, I had just got that wrong. So it's actually this networked ability that means it can actually have this massive level of growth and impact. A bit more on Totara. It is actually open. So this means as a partner, we're not reselling to someone else something that's a fixed thing. We can actually change it, modify it, make it, and customize it to what people really want and how their ecosystems really work as well. This sort of large bit of having a community behind it as well means that quite often there's a really powerful network of people to be able to support it as well. It's also incredibly affordable compared to a lot of other things as well. I'm going to dive into the first part of the ecosystem, pathways. This is one of the things when you start working with people around learning ecosystems, they sometimes get confused. They think about it as just like a list of resources that people need to go to. I think about it in a bit more of a richer way, which is actually anything that gives people guidance to guidance. So this means that I'm going to actually say for a manager, if they're guiding people on their performance, they're giving people feedback on what they're doing. An employee and learner needs to know what their goals are, what they need to be competent. They need feedback from everyone to be able to do this as well. And then they might need playlists of resources as well. As part of that mix. L&D needs a more formal thing. They need to possibly be in the spot where they're thinking about things from an organizational point of view. So they really need to be able to align learning to the organization's needs and roles. So I'm going to dive in and talk about a number of different ways of being able to do this to do some of these tools. First of all, check in the performance activities. I'm not going to dive into and read each one of these slides in detail. I'm just going to talk about the sort of way these tools can be used to build learning ecosystems. Performance management, I still get confused in my own self whether I'm calling it performance management or performance development. Performance conversations have really changed. I'm going to shift my language again. From being yearly things or 6-month things that are focused on people's underperformance or their development to being a core part of what managers do with people. The agile, the ability to have online check-ins on a weekly or basis. It's meaning which employers form to be able to do this as well. Feedback's interesting because quite often we focus in on feedback from our managers and line managers. But Totara Perform has this nice spot from this spot where I'm just talking about the fact that it has this sort of nice, I think about it as a form builder, to being in a spot where you can get feedback from your peers and other people in the organization really easily to be able to build types of powerful systems for getting feedback of different people. It can all be anonymous, it can be aggregated as well, which just gives a really powerful way for people to be able to understand their impact. So it was a really interesting thing in our own team. We're doing some work around what people were unique at and use a series of diagnostic tools. And one of the team members actually just sat there and went, as part of the exercise, through someone else, did a whole, I'm just going to ask everyone what they think I'm really valuable at. And it was funny. All those diagnostic tools, all the strength gallup polls, all got summarized back up as a sentence that everyone said back to him as well. And it was just really interesting to see how that in some ways the personalized feedback would have probably been quicker and easier than the actual diagnostic tools. Perform has a competency management system, so these can be aligned to people's positions or the positions they want to be in, or by an individual as well. It has this nice sort of spot where you can then work in a way where you have these nice sort of spider grids for these things. So we're actually using this with one of our trainees at the moment to sit there and use it a little bit more like a workflow thing, where essentially there's different parts of a competency to be done, and whether or not they prepare, whether they're working on the evidence, whether it's prepared, whether it's ready for their line manager to sign off, whether or not it's ready for the RTO to sign off as well. So you can get that happening in a really nice visual way. To make all this happen, sometimes we need to be reminded of these things as well. It's actually our clients that have digitalized their performance management system. This has been the most valuable thing, is being able to schedule things in from an organizational point of view to sit there and say, people need to do this monthly or 6 monthly. And then for the reminders to be sent, and then to be able to report on who has and hasn't done the conversations and written them up. This is just It's simple, but it's actually quite powerful. It means we're held accountable for things. We're nudged towards doing these conversations that sometimes we don't have the time to do. To switch back, and by the way, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a highlighting which particular platform as well. So in actual fact, there's a spot where in this mix of things, you do need some personalized formal learning. So the L&D person needs to be able to offer pathways that align to people's jobs. Totara has two features I'll probably mention a couple of times. One, the ability to be able to build audiences, groups of people based on, say, job roles or locations, and then to be able to align them to a program. It's like a pathway of what people do. Now, I think the slides I skipped over while I was introducing Jeff. Sorry about that. So Jeff's in the background, and he's using these tools to develop a learning ecosystem for new managers. It's one of those constant things, constant turnover of people becoming new managers. It's a really challenging problem. He really wants to build a learning ecosystem that is quite learner-driven and socially focused. So some of the actions he does with these tools is develop a competency framework, getting feedback from peers about how they're going, and then actually setting up the performance activity to be peer-to-peer coaching. And the newsletter pathways I hinted at in the last thing, and I'll talk a little bit about later as well. So the tools we're talking about are providing the manager with the tools, the prompts and the processes to become learning leaders. This notion of becoming a learning leader doesn't just happen. This shift needs to be sort of designed and supported. And this strong focus on performance management and performance conversations. Actually, it's interesting. I call them performance conversations and one-on-ones and really engaging with people on their development and where they are at is the most powerful way of being able to do that. As we move on, and it's interesting, in the 70-20-10 model, the thing we've been talking about is the relationship between the manager and the learner. That's possibly one of the most powerful learning experiences, but it's also about the fact we need spots to be able to learn with each other and from each other as well. And especially the types of skills which we're sort of talking about in terms of the case study of becoming a new manager, it is actually quite a challenging moment for everyone. And Jeff has decided that he wants the new managers to be doing an action learning project, and they want to be sharing what they're doing on that particular moment. Action learning projects are always things that are a challenge. They're new to an organization or a person and have unknowns to them. So they're good sort of things that push people to another spot. I was actually, when I was looking through some slides, the material for this, I went, wow. So we've got this spot in our organizations where we want people to be able to share what they're doing. We have these massive information silos happening. The platform that I'm going to be talking about in this particular session is Totara Engage, and the features around Totara Engage that allow people to be able to produce learner-generated content is basically what it comes down to, and be able to be in a spot where the learning environment becomes less about what the L&D person's pushing out to people and becomes more of a spot of what people can produce and share as well. So it's actually interesting. I thought Microsoft Teams was going to be our solution to social learning in our workplace. I've got a confession. Microsoft Teams is our day-to-day conversations, our work in our communication in the flow, our digitalization of conversations. It doesn't solve all of our knowledge problems. It's actually, what actually happens is quite often there's a whole series of things that are in Microsoft Teams or Slack that are interesting, but are not captured back in other systems. I almost think about Microsoft Teams as it's just like a room. is not actually documenting anything. Everything comes and goes. Yes, it's sort of searchable, but it doesn't have the same power as seeing they're going, actually, that's really useful. I'll put that into Totara Engage. I'll tag it with such and such in case someone's needs that in the future. So it's actually this, I think about it a little bit like Microsoft Teams is our communication tool, and Totara Engage is almost our documentation and reflection space, is probably the best way to put it. The core of these is collaborative workspaces. There's a little bit of a screen grab on the right-hand side. These are very much like what we're familiar now with in social networking, a spot to be able to really put an update in, put images in, and be able to have flexibility to be able to author what you need. These all get built into and can be tagged with tags, and also people's can be added and dragged in and notified at that particular moment as well. The difference between a lot of these types, a lot of what Totara Engage is doing compared to other types of social platforms is playlists. So after a period of time, a selection of resources might be developed, links, articles, blog posts, that the L&D person or someone else can then actually put together as a list. It's a contained set of stuff for people to engage with. So it becomes that pathway again. And some of the things in the learning ecosystem thinking sort of overlap a little bit as well. So this is where this sort of notion that essentially you might have a series of sort of resources, but you're actually giving people a pathway through those. So it becomes like a playlist. We have a number of clients that use LinkedIn Learning, and for an employee, LinkedIn Learning can be quite overwhelming. It's just so much. So we work with them to essentially curate selections of resources that are relevant to what the employees are facing as problems in their organization at the time. And sometimes that might be a list of resources, so it becomes a playlist. Sometimes it might be individual things, but it's almost is content curating and highlighting for people what's in amongst all that huge mess of content sometimes. Actually, I'm sort of talking about content curation tip, which leads into this. Content curation is a really great way of moving to a learning ecosystem. Content curation, if it's done really well, makes everyone work harder as learners. So if it's in a spot where your learners are actually doing content curation, they're having to do a whole lot of work to select things, choose things, comment things, and tag things. If in actual fact, the learner there's a curated libraries of things that learners are engaging with, it's quite often not harder work for people to actually go into something like that and learn and extract and think through than being told exactly what to do in an e-learning module. So back to Jeff. So the thing that some people in the session or some people who are listening to the recording might be going, yeah, Robin, this is all very nice, but people don't do this. I had this lovely line that I heard sometime from a very experienced person who works a lot with social learning. Her line was, social learning at work is not like it is in our personal lives. We don't naturally engage with it. So you have to structure it. You have to design it. So essentially, Jeff does a few things. It asks everyone to share at the end of the week with something that they've learned, and then something that they're struggling with. And then they rotate around the group for everyone to write an article about becoming the experience of a manager. There's also a playlist that he's put together of more formal things that he thinks are really useful for people that are from different around the web as well. So into streams, learning in the flow of work, which is a thing that has multiple, it is actually linked strongly to this learning with others because we're working with others. It's less about resources and more about the experience of conversations with people. So even that thing of getting people to communicate what they've learned each week is a way of people being able to actually learn from experience and learn in the flow of work as well. The tools that people need for this are essentially, first of all, L&D needs to be able to deliver beyond courses. We keep on encountering learning management systems that are essentially SCORM players, or SCORM players or event booking systems. You know, say or, because essentially there's one particular L&D person who's followed us around a couple of times with different Totara systems. There was one time he couldn't switch LMSs, and he went, I can't build a course that can have a SCORM file and a face-to-face event in it. I have to have them as two different courses in the learning management system. So it was that sense that he couldn't bring things together. The other tool is, and I won't go over it again, is that the fact that the manager conversations is just so important. And then giving the learners that management, that time and space to reflect. There's questions about what have you learned recently. The other really important aspect for learning in the flow of work is just-in-time resources. Things that are smaller, things that are sometimes called micro-learning. And this works really well with mobile. So in the background, Totara has a mobile app, which is interesting. In fact, I call it in the background. It's sort of like there's the core web platforms, and then there's a mobile app. So I think of it sitting at the side that allows people to be able to access things anytime, anywhere. Things are small things, push notifications. It's really flexible with how it works. It can be customized as well. So it can be a really great platform for these just-in-time resources or snippets of learning while you're on the flow, as we start to all maybe get back to commuting one day, maybe in being in the spot where you can access something while you're commuting. As you're doing things, quite often you don't want to be in a spot where you're searching for them. So Totara Engage has a spot where these resources that are built by learners and L&D people can be recommended to people. This is based on what they've seen in the past, what they've done in the past, but also really nicely based on their job roles and job positions and locations and all that other HR data that we have in our learning management systems. So it builds up a really nice viewpoint of everyone. Totara Engage does have a Microsoft Teams integration, even if I just criticize Microsoft Teams. It's quite often where we spend a lot of our time now. It's in a spot where you can just jump in quickly, do searches in the catalog, and really find out what your progress is as well. So it is actually in that spot where all of a sudden your learning becomes more integrated in the places where you're actually doing your work, which is Microsoft Teams. So just these couple of tools, crossover, streams, and gardeners, and they're really allowing for collaboration and just-in-time learning. And for me, it's really about the core embedding these skills to become self-directed learners. I hinted at this before that essentially below all of this is our foundations of really our knowledge. And quite often I think of it in terms of the fact we sometimes confuse learning with knowledge. Knowledge is a stepping stone to changing behavior. It needs to be there. I'm not going to dive into this too much, but one of the things is that's really sometimes incredibly confusing for everyone is actually how to find anything. So Totara has this lovely visual catalog that you can find and filter by things on the left-hand side to be able to really see and be able to pick up things in different ways. As I said before, quite a few of our clients use LinkedIn Learning. We actually see some of the content libraries fitting into this knowledge space. They're quite often really good at giving video and information, not quite often really great at being highly interactive and having really great behavioral change. But what it means is all of a sudden, as an organization, you have this selection of things which people can dive into and become more self-directed. One particular government agency we work with did this lovely thing as they were going around to the teams launching their LMS. They sat there and went and literally the L&D manager would sit there and say, "What's some of your hobbies?" And then go into LinkedIn Learning and see if there was learning around those. And then sitting there saying, "Look, if you want to use LinkedIn Learning for developing your photography skills, go for it. It's not just about your work life. It's about the whole of you as well." It was just a really powerful thing. Very generally, that particular government agency would be seen as highly structured and conservative, not somewhere that seems innovative and actually can't give their employees a lot of freedom for lots of different reasons. And it was just a really great way of getting a strong uptake of the learning management system was the best way to put it, and a strong uptake of discretionary learning. In the background, just sitting there going, "Is this all working?" So I've got these weekly things happening. I've got these resources in Totara Engage. I've got my content library that can access by the learning management system. But is it all working? This is where reporting comes in and finding out what people are thinking as well. So the first tool is surveys. So Totara Engage has a really just very simple, very quick survey builder. Survey builders are really interesting. A lot of the time in customer service, we do really quick. Are you happy? Are you not happy? What's your rating out of 10? What's your feedback? We don't generally do that in L&D. We actually quite often end up with very complicated evaluation tools. What I really like about the survey tool in Totara Engage is it fits more into this space of these really quick, simple survey tools to be able to get a heartbeat on what people are doing with things. Now, we should have a slide on this one. Totara Engage, Totara Perform, and Totara Learn all have a unified reporting engine. So you can work up and build these customized dashboards. Many clients are listening to this afterwards. I will do a client-only webinar in the near future on building dashboards as well. So it has this sort of really flexible learning reporting system that can go across multiple parts of the Talent Experience Platform. These can be exported, they can be embedded in other things. But managers can go in and just filter things and build them themselves. And then there's really detailed course reporting that you may be more used to in a more classic education-focused learning management system. As I think I might have just mentioned as well, managers have access to these as well. So they can have their own customized dashboards to be able to see really what their team's doing or not doing. So they can keep a real pulse on that as well. These are one of the most flexible things in Totara, in the Totara system as well. Now, I quite often run these particular webinars as half-an-hour sessions. And I actually think I'm probably going to finish up this particular one in about 35 minutes rather than the 60 minutes. So the people who are joining me live, you have a little bit more time back in your day, and the people who are listening to the recording, you're going to have a bit more time as well. I still do have a little bit more to talk about because it's hothouses. So hothouses is this notion that learning's about changing behavior. And quite often the thing that is a barrier to actually being in a spot where we know we should change something, we have the knowledge, is being able to practice that and getting feedback on that in a safe space from peers or from other people as well. So this is where I think of the fact that the really great performance-focused learning is really about where it's highly interactive and really highly engaging. It's just so powerful for everyone. I think what's really exciting about the time we've just been through and still going through is the way hybrid learning and blended learning's changed. So we went into a spot where essentially very quickly we went, everything has to be remote, everything has to be live because we're working remotely. As we, especially in Australia, came out of the first batch of lockdowns, to people sitting there going, what needs to be live? what needs to be online? What do people need time to process? What's really difficult? So I'm going to use an example of, will actually eventually be a case study on our Sprout Labs website. It was upskilling for witness intermediates in the justice system in Tasmania. Really challenging job role where the witness intermediates are helping people with communication skills, actually helping the justice system work with people who are actually have communication skills. So it's communication skills. It's a really complicated thing. There's a whole lot of legislation requirements, confidentiality agreements, and confidentiality guidelines, and just even how the whole court system works that people need to know as well before they can start to function, to actually then sit there and go, actually, we can't do that type of questioning with all that. The witness isn't going to be able to understand the type of questioning. So all of that got turned into an interactive experience, all that background around the legislation experience. And there was a series during this time of highly interactive virtual sessions, just to get people sort of thinking, reflecting, and processing that in a different way. And then the course would have been a 5-day face-to-face course. It got compressed down into a 2-day, highly interactive role-based experience. So people were in this spot where they're actually really practicing the skills, really finding out what they were doing right or doing wrong and what the job really involved. So it becomes a different type of thinking. So you sometimes need different types of tools. And we came to Totara because we're designing these ecosystems, and we're finding a lot of corporate learning management systems just were not able to build the type of learning experiences we were actually building. We were finding the tools were just not there to do it. So we then also found that a lot of the Totara partners were very technical focused rather than learning focused. So that's one reason why we became a Totara partner to bridge that sort of gap between technology and learning. So Totara, for me, a Totara course fits very much in this sort of pathways mode. You have these multiple different bits, and this is switch slides too quickly. A good example of our Sprout Labs own induction. So there's a book of knowledge that people can change, some things about some of our policies, getting back into Glasshouse, doing a skills review using a assessment tool, and then social activities as well. So it becomes a sort of mix of things that some learning management systems can't do. Now, event management is not to be underrated. Essentially, it is still face-to-face or online a core part of what organizations do. One particular not-for-profit we worked with essentially revolutionized their administration of their event, their face-to-face program by just turning on that part of Totara, and it saved them so much time. I remember in a training session, the trainer's going, so I can see a list of the attendees straight after they sign up. Yes. So I don't have to ask anyone about who's attending the workshop next week. No, you don't. You can just go straight in here and have a look. So there's a really sophisticated event management system, which has a really nice Zoom and MS Teams integration as well. So you can actually organize your virtual events from here as well. Just while we're talking about formal learning, there's also this thing of programs I hinted at before, and these become a little bit like essentially a series of courses that are held together with a series of logic. So there's things where people have requirements. You have to do this before you do then that. One of our team members actually explains them. They sit there and go, well, it's a little bit like you do a unit at a university, but the units add up to the course. But sometimes you have to be able to do one, before you do a later unit, you have to do another unit. So you've got these sort of prerequisites for things. So that all gets designed into things in a really nice way. And this can then be aligned, and particular people in particular job roles can actually then do things as well. So essentially, Jeff's in this spot where he's in a spot where he could build an audience that sits there and says, these are our people that are our new managers. Okay, so these people have got the manager role in their name, job name, and they did that after, say, it's 1st of January 2022. Working in the future for some reason, and those people then go into that audience, and then they go into the new manager program. So some of the things he does is actually build some formal learning courses like what I'm just talking about, and then uses the event management features to be able to organize Zoom meetings for people to be able to discuss their action projects and explore challenging situations in a private environment. Now, what we've been talking about today is the mixing between learning ecosystems as a design model and a way of thinking about building learning cultures, especially around paths and the ways of being able to think and work in streams of learning. And then the tools that Totara Experience Platform uses to enable these things. If you want to have a really closer look at the Totara Talent Experience, please reply to any of my messages that I'm sure you get in your inbox, or the ones that come back out from our own team, and we can set up a customized demo for you as well. Cool. Thank you very much for your time today if you're listening to the recording, and thank you very much for the people who've joined me live today as well. I will stop the recording and switch. And if anyone's got any questions, I'll hang around for a few minutes as well.